Masaccio. BSAN Giovanni Valdarno, 1401, di Rome, 1428-29. In his short life, Masaccio took up where Giotto left off. Together with Brunelleschi and Donatello, he was the greatest innovator of Italian art in the 15th century. While his contemporaries were painting in the international Gothic style, he applied his friend Brunelleschi's mathematical laws of perspective to create the illusion of space on a flat surface. Masaccio used a single light source so that the play of light and shadow added solidity. And instead of decorative detail and generalized elegance, he gave his figures strong bodies, individual looks, and expressive faces. Masaccio is best known for a polyptych, multi-paneled altarpiece. For a church in Pisa, its panels are now scattered around art galleries in Europe and the US, a fresco cycle in Florence's Brancacci Chapel, and the Holy Trinity in S. Maria Novella, Florence. The Brancacci Chapel was a training ground for later Florentine artists such as Michelangelo, who went there to copy and study Masaccio's figures. Lifeline. 1401 born near Florence. 1422 becomes a member of the Painters Guild in Florence. c. 1425-28 collaborates with Masolino on a fresco cycle of the life of St. Peter, including scenes of Adam and Eve, in Brancacci Chapel, Santa Maria del Carmine, Florence. 1428 moves to Rome before completing the frescoes. c. 1428-29 dies suddenly. Perhaps from plague, but some suspect he may have been poisoned. Brancacci Chapel. The banking Brancacci family paid for the 3 walls of this chapel in the Florentine church of Santa Maria del Carmine to be painted with scenes from the Gospels. The tribute money, below, runs almost the entire length of the upper register of the left wall. It tells of a tax demanded of St. Peter, a story that resonated with Florentines, who paid an unpopular tax for the defense of their city. Holy Trinity with the Virgin, St. John, and donors using the laws of linear perspective. Masaccio makes the architectural niche look like a hole in the wall. The donors, who paid for the painting, kneel outside the niche. c. 1425-28, fresco, 6.8 x 3.2 ms. Maria Novella, Florence, Italy. Cielo Siaraic. Triangles. The triangular arrangement stabilizes the figures and represents the Trinity, God the Father, top, the Holy Ghost, the dove, and God the Son, Christ. The tribute money. The figures get proportionately larger from the left to the right of this fresco, mirroring the perspective of the building shown in the picture, and also that of the adjoining fresco. Cent 1425-28, fresco, Brancacci Chapel, S. Maria de Carmine, Florence, Italy. Cielo Siaraic. The main character St. Peter appears 3 times in the story, in the right hand. Group giving money to the tax collector, in the main group. Gesturing, and hooking a coin out of a fish's mouth on the left. Light and realism to match the perspective. Light falls from a single source, top right, creating shadows and highlights that make the individualized figures look more realistic. Donatello. B. Florence, c. 1386, D. Florence, 1466. Donatello, short for Donato di Niccolò, was to sculpture what his friend Masaccio was to painting. Abandoning his Gothic training in Ghiberti's workshop, Donatello grafted a psychological insight onto classical models. His figures are anatomically accurate with individual characters, the embodiment of humanism. Donatello mastered the art of linear perspective from his friend Brunelleschi, combining it with emotional reaction to forge a startling realism. He was prolific and versatile, and his work had enormous impact on his contemporaries. His influence was spread by his travels. He worked not just in Florence, but also in several other major art centers. St. George and the Dragon, see panel at foot of statue, right, shows Donatello's technical virtuosity in the imperceptibly subtle way in which it depicts space. High relief gives way to a barely scratched background that suggests hazy trees in the distance. Donatello was the inventor of this kind of drawing in stone. Lifeline. 1404 to 2007. In his early 20s, is an assistant in Ghiberti's workshop. 1430 to 33 works and studies classical sculpture in Rome. 1443 to 1453 based in Padua, where his works include an equestrian monument to military leader Gadamelita, cast in 1447. Donatello's reliefs influenced painters as well as sculptors. 1454 returns to Florence, where he spends most of the rest of his life. Dead Christ tended by angels. The impassive expression on Christ's face contrasts with the anguish of the two angels. See 1435-43 marble, 81 x 114 centimeters, Victoria and Albert Museum, London, on loan to National Gallery, London, UK. St. George J. Square stance and slight frown of concentration imply the saint's strength of purpose. In the shallow panel below the statue, St. George slays the dragon. See 1413-17 marble, Bargello, and equals Florence, Italy. St. Mark / in this classical pose, the weight-bearing leg is covered by vertical cloth folds, like the flutes of a column, while fabric wrinkles emphasize the bent knee of the other leg. The elongated torso compensates for the viewer looking up at the high niche. 1411 marble, or San Michele, Florence, Italy. The Feast of Herod in the center of the scene, where the main action might be expected to take place, Donatello leaves a vacuum, a rift between the presentation of St. John's head on a platter on one side and the horrified recoiling of the guests on the other. Applying the new system of linear perspective, the sculptor uses a low wall to separate the earlier scenes in the story from the key episode in time and place. See 1417-30, Gilded Bronze, S. Giovanni, Siena, Italy. Masolino. B. Panicale, Umbria? C. 1383, D. Unknown, C. 1435-40? Tommaso di Cristofano, known as Masolino, collaborated with Masaccio on the Brancacci Chapel frescoes, opposite, in Florence. Although about 20 years his senior, he joined the Painters Guild in Florence a year later than Masaccio, in 1423, and the younger artist influenced the older. Little is known of his life, except that he worked in various places in Italy and in Hungary. More is known of his style, which is softer and more decorative than Masaccio's, and graceful rather than bold, qualities that grew more pronounced after Masaccio's untimely death. Banquet of Herod. This fresco straddles old and new styles. The figures are more decorative than realistic, yet the diminishing size of the colonnade puts Masolino at the forefront of spatial representation. See 1435, fresco, Baptistry, Castiglione Olona, Italy. Temptation of Adam and Eve. Masolino bathes the two figures in a diffused light and makes them look slim and elegant, emphasizing the beauty God gave to humanity and the pair's happiness before the fall. See 1425-28, fresco,
Maria del
Chapel,
Carmine, Florence. Closer look. Framing device. The tree of temptation creates a canopy over the heads of Adam and Eve in an otherwise bare setting. The snake curls over Eve's head like a branch from the tree.
Paolo Uccello. B. Florence, c. 1397, D. Florence, 1475. Paolo Uccello was obsessed by perspective. According to the biographer artist Giorgio Vasari, see page 178, he spent all night working out vanishing points. When his wife urged him to come to bed, he dawdled, unable to tear himself away from his drawings. He solved the problem of making objects look three-dimensional on a flat surface using linear perspective, without the help of light and shadow. Born Paolo di Dano, this eccentric man was dubbed Paolo Uccello, Paolo of the bird, because of his love of birds and animals. But even they were neglected in his pursuit of a mathematical system that submitted the material world to human logic. Unlike his fellow Florentines, Uccello used perspective for its own sake. He was not interested in furthering realism, or bringing a religious story to life, or even in symbolic value. His art was ornamental, and has a rich narrative vein that gives a fairy tale tone to his work. Lifeline. C. 1412 apprenticed as a teenager to Ghiberti. 1425-27 makes mosaics at Basilica DS. Marco, Venice, 1436 first surviving dated work, a fresco depicting an equestrian statue in Florence. Cathedral, 1444-45 works in Padua, 1465-68 works in Urbino, c. 1470, paints St. George and i.e. the Dragon, one of the first Italian works on canvas, 1475 dies in Florence, where he spent most of his life. Birth of the Virgin. The space is convincingly deep, receding into a bedroom niche. The painting is close in style to Uccello, but some authorities think Idas be a follower rather than the master himself. C. 1440-50, fresco, Duomo, Prato, Italy. Battle of San Romano. One of Uccello's biggest commissions was a series of 3 paintings depicting a recent battle between Florence and Siena. Lorenzo de' Medici was so anxious to obtain the pictures that he resorted to force when the owners would not sell them, and the dispute ended up in court. C. 1440-50, tempera on panel, 182 by 323 centimeters, Uffizi, Florence, Italy. Battle of San Romano. Battle pennants unfurl against a hedge of rose and orange trees, and beyond, a farm peopled with tiny figures. The splendid hat of the general, on a white horse in the center, contrives to be both round and octagonal. C. 1440-50, tempera on panel, 182 by 320 centimeters, National Gallery, London, UK. The Hunt in the Forest. Uccello combines a world of chivalric make-believe with a study of perspective. 1460s, oil on panel, 73 by 177 centimeters, Ashmolean, Oxford, UK. Oh, what a sweet thing this perspective is! Paolo Uccello, according to Vasari. Cielo es Araic. Vanishing prey. The lines of the trees, diminishing in size into the distance, and the fallen tree trunks direct the eye to a central vanishing point, the spot where receding lines seem to converge. Uccello makes this the place where the stag, the focus of the hunt, disappears from view. Fra Angelico. Bivicchio, c. 1395, Drome, 1455. Fra Angelico was beatified by the Vatican, the first step to sainthood, in 1982. His painting was influenced by Masaccio's handling of space, but still connected to the Gothic tradition of lively narrative. He made numerous versions of the Annunciation to the Virgin Mary, but he is best known for the frescoes he painted in the convent of S. Marco, Florence. In painting the frescoes, his aim was to encourage, express, and channel the devotion of the monastic community. Fra Angelico's simplicity of line and vivid color carry spiritual conviction and serenity. He is able to represent space as realistically and harmoniously as Masaccio, but he keeps his setting bare so as not to distract from the religious purity of the work. His use of light and pure color was a starting point for painters such as Piero della Francesca. Lifeline. 1417. First recorded as a painter while in his early 20s. By 1423 becomes a Dominican friar, taking the name Fra Giovanni. C. 1438-45 paints series of frescoes in S. Marco, Florence. 1447-50 paints frescoes in the Vatican chapel of Pope Nicholas V. 1455 dies, and is buried in S. Maria sopra Minerva, Rome. The Annunciation. The elegantly elongated figures are in the Ortli International Gothic style, although the architecture is classical and the perspective gives realistic depth. Fra Angelico shows the moment when the Virgin Mary submits to the news that she is to give birth to the Son of God. C. 1430-32, tempera and gold, central panel, whole altarpiece 194 by 194 centimeters, Prado, Madrid, Spain. Cielo es Luke. The columns separate Mary, the Archangel Gabriel, and Adam and Eve, mirroring the triptych, 3-part altarpiece, format of which it forms the central panel. The shaft of holy light links all 3 sections. The Sermon on the Mount. A single light source illuminates the semicircle of disciples listening to Jesus. Not one plant relieves the rocky landscape. All attention is on the religious message. C. 1442, fresco, cell 32, Museo dis. Marco, Florence, Italy. Benazzo Gazzoli. B. Florence, c. 1421, Di Pistoia, 1497. Gazzoli was apprenticed as a goldsmith, and helped Ghiberti to make bronze panels for the Florence baptistry. He then became the pupil of Beato Angelico and worked as his assistant, but Gazzoli's talent was for the ornamental. He is famed for one particular work, the Procession of the Magi, commissioned by the Medici family for the private chapel in their city palace in Florence. Reveling in the international Gothic style of a French book of hours, see page 89, he covered the walls with the decorative pageantry of the king's royal journey through an enchanted landscape. After finishing this fresco, he worked on altarpieces and created a fresco cycle of Old Testament scenes in the Campo Santo in Pisa, which was damaged by bombing in World War II. The procession of the Magi Gozzoli applies the new knowledge of light and shade and recession to suggest space. However, his real interest lies in portraying fine costume and jewel-like detail. See 1459-61, fresco, Chapel of Palazzo Medici Riccardi, Florence, Italy. CLOSRIAC. Self-portrait Gozzoli painted himself in the procession. Eine red cap with the words Opus Benocii, work of Benozzo. Also featured are the Medici family whose dynasty the fresco elaborated. In context, illuminated manuscripts before the invention of printing in the 15th century. The Bible was transcribed by monks and illuminated, richly decorated. Monks such as Fra Angelico, who may have started as a manuscript illuminator, were the last generation to work in the international Gothic style. The crucifixion attributed to Fra Angelico, early 1430s. This decorated initial, and Isa detail from an illuminated missal, Piero della Francesca. About 1415–1492. Piero della Francesca is one of the most admired 15th-century Italian painters. The cool color palette and geometrical compositions contribute to the refined and meditative nature of his works. Piero was born in Borgo San Sepolcro, in Tuscany. He worked in various central Italian towns, but retained links with San Sepolcro, visible in the background of the Baptism of Christ. The distinctive rolling hills are depicted in a number of his works, such as the Nativity. We know nothing of Piero's training, and the chronology of his works is hard to establish, as many are lost. By 1439 he was working in Florence with Domenico Veneziano, whose treatment of space, like that of Uccello, must have influenced him. Piero was also a mathematical theorist. This interest is reflected in the clearly defined volume of the figures and accurate perspective in his works. It is balanced by a naturalism which derived from Netherlandish art. His patrons were among the most powerful men in Italy, the Duke of Urbino, Sigismund Malatesta in Rimini, and Pope Nicholas V in Rome. According to tradition, Piero taught Signorelli. Vasari says he became blind in old age. He was buried in San Sepolcro. The Baptism of Christ is a good introduction to Piero della Francesca's style. Within an arched frame, the baptism is taking place in a landscape strikingly similar to the countryside around San Sepolcro. In 1442, Piero della Francesca was recorded as town councillor in Borgo San Sepolcro. The Baptism of Christ portrays Christ being baptized by John, his head surmounted by a dove representing the Holy Spirit. Christ, John's hand, the bird and the bull form an axis which divides the painting in two symmetrical parts. A second division is created by the tree on the left, which instead divides it according to the golden ratio. The Flagellation of Christ, in Italian, Flagellazione di Cristo, also known as the Flagellation of Urbino I, is a work by Piero della Francesca, a tempera on poplar wood of 58.4 by 81.5 cm 2, preserved at the Galleria Nazionale del Marche in Urbino. Its date of creation is uncertain, but the museum's website indicates that the work was made between 1459 and 14603. Famous for its absolute mastery of perspective one, its geometric and symbolic complexity makes it one of the most commented works in art history. It was created under the movement of the First Renaissance. The Dream of Constantine is a fresco by Piero della Francesca that is part of the cycle The Legend of the True Cross, made in the main chapel of the Basilica of San Francesco in Arezzo, and dating from 1458 to 1466. The fresco was probably painted in the second part of the work, after Piero della Francesca came into contact with Flemish culture in Rome, with the result that the painter developed an even stronger sense of light. The Dream of Constantine is one of the most convincing night scenes ever painted in European art, and remained almost unmatched in terms of dramatic effects until the time of Caravaggio. The Flagellation of Christ, in Italian,
Flagellazione di Cristo, also known as the Flagellation of Urbino I, is a work by Piero della Francesca, a tempera on poplar wood of 58.4 by 81.5 cm 2, preserved at the Galleria Nazionale del Marche in Urbino. Its date of creation is uncertain, but the museum's website indicates that the work was made between 1459 and 14603. Famous for its absolute mastery of perspective one, its geometric and symbolic complexity makes it one of the most commented works in art history. It was created under the movement of the First Renaissance. The Montefeltro altarpiece. This type of altarpiece, in which the Madonna and Child are flanked by saints and, here, angels, is called a Sacra Conversazione, holy conversation. Bright color offsets the solemnity of their expressions. Above the Madonna is an ostrich 9G, symbol of the Virgin Birth, that was sometimes hung over altars dedicated to her. C. 1472-74, oil on panel, 248 by 170 centimeters, Pinacoteca di Brera, Milan, Italy. Closer look. Perfect symmetry. The overall symmetry of the painting is relieved by the kneeling donor, the Duke of Urbino, who commissioned the work, and by the fall of light. Shadow crosses over the center of the shell-like structure above the Madonna's head. In Italian Renaissance painting, the Madonna is often centrally placed. Domenico Veneziano. B. Venice? Early 15th century, D. Florence, c. 1461. The artist's biographer Vasari, see page 178, claimed that Domenico brought oil painting from Venice to Florence. This is no longer thought to be true, but he did inject color, clarity of lighting, and texture into the linear Florentine style. These qualities are visible in the work of Piero della Francesca, who was Veneziano's assistant on a fresco cycle in Florence. Only fragments of these frescoes survive, and little else is known about Domenico's career. His main surviving work is the St. Lucy altarpiece, painted for the Church of S. Lucia de' Magnoli in Florence. The central panel is in the Uffizi, Florence, Italy. St. John in the Desert/He classical style of this nude contrasts with his medieval halo and the craggy rocks, which look Flemish or Byzantine. C. 1445, tempera on panel. Panel from the St. Lucy altarpiece, 28x32 cm, National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C., U.S. Luca Signorelli. B. Cortona, c. 1440-50, Di Cortona, 1523. Said to be a pupil of Piero della Francesca, Signorelli added movement and emotion to his master's solid forms and clear light and color. He finished the wall frescoes for the Sistine Chapel, left incomplete by other artists, and went on to even greater things in Orvieto Cathedral. In his depiction of the end of the world, figures writhe in agony and faces show torment and terror. His expressive, muscular nudes inspired Michelangelo in his fresco painting of male nudes in the Sistine Chapel. Preaching of the Antichrist detail, with gesture and expression, Signorelli conveys the devil's insidious whispers and Christ's unease. 1499-1504, fresco, Chapel of the Madonna DS. Brizio, Orvieto Cathedral, Italy. Antonello da Messina. B. Messina, c. 1430, D. Messina, 1479. Antonello was one of the great pioneers of oil painting in Italy. Although born in Sicily, he probably trained in Naples. There he would have been able to study the work of contemporary Flemish artists. Naples and Flanders had strong links at this time. Combining Flemish oil painting techniques and realism with the clear and dignified Italian approach to form and space, he developed a style that greatly influenced Venetian artists in particular, including Giovanni Bellini, see page 126. Little is known of Antonello's life. He may have made several visits to the Italian mainland, but only one is securely documented, in 1475-76, when he painted a large altarpiece for the Church of S. Cassiano in Venice. Only fragments of this work now remain, but it greatly impressed his Venetian contemporaries. Lifeline. c. 1430, born in Messina, Sicily. c. 1450, probably trains in Naples with Niccolò Colantonio, the leading painter of the day there.
1456 documented working independently in Messina. 1475 to 76 visits Venice where paints D.S. Cassiano altarpiece. 1479 dies in Messina. Saint Jerome in his study The austerity of the architectural setting is counterbalanced by the central image of Saint Jerome with his books and papers, and by the birds, plants, and glimpses of landscape through the windows to either side. See 1475, oil on panel, 46 x 36 centimeters, National Gallery, London, UK. Portrait of a man. Antonello's three-quarter view bust portraits were popular in Venice. This one may be a self-portrait. Cent 1475, oil on panel, 36 by 25 centimeters, National Gallery, London, UK. Calvary, also known as the Antwerp Crucifixion, / He Virgin Mary and Saint John mourn the dead pitiable Christ. He is flanked by the two thieves crucified with him. 1475, oil on panel, 53 by 43 centimeters, Koninklijk Museum voor Schoon Kunsten, Antwerp, Belgium. Filippo Lippi. B. Florence, 1406, Di Spoleto, 1469. Filippo di Tommaso di Lippo, better known as Fra Filippo Lippi, was an innovative Florentine painter, famous mainly for his frescoes and depictions of the Madonna and Child. He was brought up in a Carmelite friary, and became a friar himself, but he eventually left the order after a scandalous affair with a nun. Lippi's first major work, the Barbadori altarpiece, led to important commissions and the support of the powerful Medici. From 1452 to 1466, Lippi painted frescoes in Prato Cathedral, probably his finest works. Immediately afterward, he began work on frescoes in the cathedral at Spoleto, where he died in 1469. The Barbadori altarpiece. This is one of the earliest examples of a Sacra Conversazione, in which Madonna, Child, and saints are grouped in a single panel. 1437, oil on panel, 208 by 244 centimeters, Louvre, Paris, France. Antonio del Pagliolo. B. Florence, c. 1432, di Rome, 1498. Antonio and his younger brother Piero, c. 1441 c. 1496, ran a successful workshop together in Florence, and later in Rome. They worked in various media, including painting and sculpture, and it is often difficult to distinguish their individual contributions. However, Antonio is regarded as the more creative and innovative, his mastery in depicting the human figure putting him in the forefront of Florentine artists of his time. He is said to have dissected corpses to study anatomy. The brothers were known as Pagliolo because they were the sons of a chicken seller. Pollo is Italian for chicken. The Martyrdom of Saint Sebastian, this altarpiece, was painted for the Church of SS. Annunziata, Florence, which owned a relic of Saint Sebastian. The figures are probably by Antonio and the landscape by Piero. 1475, oil on panel, 292 by 203 centimeters, National Gallery, London, UK.